Hello and welcome. Today we are stepping into the fascinating world of diplomacy, where power, persuasion, and politics collide. We'll be exploring two compelling books. First, Sublime Diplomacy by Iver Neumann, and second, The Future of Diplomacy by Allen Herrickson. Well, what is diplomacy really? It's more than just handshakes and signed treaties. At its core, diplomacy is the art of managing relationships between nations. But it also shapes how power is projected, how trust is built, and at times, how war is avoided. In this video, we'll trace diplomacy's evolution, from the golden thrones to the quiet precision of modern, data-driven negotiations, and discover why it remains one of the most vital tools in global affairs today. Our first stage begins in Byzantine Empire, which lasted for 1,000 years after fall of Rome. Diplomacy in this era wasn't about negotiation. It was about display of power. Imagine seeing mechanical lions roaring, music playing everywhere, and walls covered in gold. What was the goal? The goal was to overwhelm foreign visitors with sublime power. The philosopher Longinus wrote that the sublime leaves people speechless. The Byzantines used spectacle to make others feel impressed and even inferior. Diplomacy was about making others see Byzantium as the center of the power. In short, diplomacy was a stage, and the emperor always played the lead. This was diplomacy not through conversation, but through psychological dominance. The second stage of diplomacy is called early modern diplomacy. In this stage, we move into the 17th and 18th centuries, where the rules of the game start to shift. Diplomacy moves out of the throne room into the shadows. This era was shaped in part by the ideas of philosopher Edmund Burke, who believed that fear and uncertainty could inspire a kind of respect, even awe. He called it the sublime, and monarchs took notice. Rather than impressing through golden lions and lavish halls, power was now projected through silence, mystery, and control. Negotiations happened behind closed doors. Information was carefully managed, sometimes manipulated. Diplomacy became a strategy of exclusion. A visiting ambassador might be allowed just enough access to feel important, but never enough to see the full picture. Foreign policy turned into a deliberate puzzle, difficult to read, and even harder to predict. Burke once said, "Fear is the key to the sublime," and this form of diplomacy was built on exactly that principle. It wasn't about dazzling, it was about making others uneasy and keeping the upper hand through secrecy. Now we enter the third stage, contemporary diplomacy. Gone are the days of spectacle and secrecy. Today, power is exercised through something far less dramatic, but just as influential. Bureaucracy. Modern diplomacy isn't shaped by the realities of information overload, a concept explored by philosopher Jean-François Lyotard. In a world structured with data, decisions aren't made in smoky backrooms or grand halls. They're made in endless meetings, passed through layers of reports, policy briefs, and email chains. Diplomacy today is slow, procedural, and often frustrating. It's about coordination, not charisma, strategy, not a spectacle. And while we have more transparency than ever before, we also risk being buried by process. Decisions take so long to be approved. They often arrive either too late or too early to make a real difference. Let's be honest, in some ways that's progress, but in others it leaves us wondering. In our pursuit of openness and structure, Have we sacrificed agility? The very thing diplomacy needs most in a world that moves faster than ever? It is worth to mention that even today we still see traces of all three stages at play. We still lean on spectacle in global summits, state visits, and carefully staged moments like world leaders standing shoulder to shoulder at the G7. Secrecy hasn't vanished either. It remains essential in sensitive negotiations, like nuclear talks or intelligence sharing between allies. And of course, bureaucracy runs deep, shaping everything from climate accord to trade policy, with teams of diplomats managing the details behind the scene. But this mix of styles creates new challenges. Diplomacy today can be too slow to keep up with fast-moving threats like cyber attacks or pandemics. It can feel too distant from everyday people, fueling public distrust and misunderstanding. So what's the way forward? The lesson is clear. The future of diplomacy isn't about abandoning tradition, but balancing it, finding the sweet spot between heritage and adaptability, between structure and speed. Diplomacy has never been perfect, but it remains one of the few tools we have for navigating a fractured world. Its future depends not just on institutions, but on our own willingness to keep talking, especially when it's hard to do so.